After you see this new twist in the Logan Paul Pokémon saga, you start asking a very uncomfortable question. Not, is this shady? Not, is this controversial? But something much heavier. How did this even happen? Because this story isn't about a YouTuber being reckless. It isn't about cancel culture. And it definitely isn't just about a rare trading card. This is about people who believe they own something real. People who believe they bought into a legitimate investment. People who were told they were participating in the future of collecting. And now, years later, many of those same people say they were locked out. Unable to sell. Unable to withdraw. Unable to touch money they believed belonged to them. Meanwhile, the very same Pokemon card is back in the spotlight, being promoted again, being auctioned again, with numbers being thrown around that most people will never see in their lifetime, and the person who originally sold pieces of that card appears to own it again. So today, we're not talking about drama. We're not talking about opinions. We're talking about how influencer power, financial language, and collectibles collided and allegedly created one of the most illiquid investments the internet has ever seen. This is the Logan Paul Pokémon story, and the deeper you go, the darker it gets. To understand why this situation has made so many people furious, you first need to understand what this card represents. Logan Paul owns one of the rarest Pokemon cards on Earth, a Pikachu Illustrator card, graded PSA 10. In the Pokemon world, this card is not just valuable, it is legendary. It represents the peak of the hobby, the kind of card collectors dream about but never expect to see in real life. When Logan acquired it, he didn't just buy a collectible, he bought a symbol. And he made sure the world knew it. He wore it on a massive diamond chain. He brought it to events. He turned it into content. He turned it into an identity. The card stopped being just a piece of cardboard. It became part of the Logan Paul brand. But instead of simply holding onto it as a collector, Logan decided to take it one step further. He helped promote a platform called Liquid Marketplace. The idea sounded revolutionary. Liquid Marketplace claimed it would allow everyday people to own fractions of rare, expensive collectibles. Instead of needing millions of dollars, you could buy a small piece, a token, a digital representation of ownership, article, sports memorabilia, and most importantly, the Pokemon card. Logan publicly framed this as democratizing access, leveling the playing field, giving regular people exposure to assets normally reserved for the ultra-wealthy. It sounded modern. It sounded innovative. And for many people, it sounded like opportunity. But opportunity without clarity is dangerous. Here's where the story starts to shift. Fractional ownership sounds simple until you actually ask what it means. In traditional investing, ownership comes with rights. You know what you own, you know how to sell, you know how to exit. With fractional collectibles, especially when tied to tokens, everything becomes blurry. According to public statements and reporting, users bought tokens believing those tokens represented real ownership in the underlying asset. Not just exposure, not just a bet, ownership. Over time, millions of dollars worth of tokens tied to that Pikachu card were sold, more than half of the card's value, and that raises an uncomfortable question. If the majority was sold, who actually owned the card? Was it Logan? Was it the token holders? Was it the platform? That question never received a clear, simple answer. And as time passed, users began reporting something far more serious. They couldn't get their money out. People began saying withdrawals were disabled, that selling tokens wasn't possible, that funds were inaccessible. This is where Liquid Marketplace stopped being described as innovative and started being described as illiquid. Because liquidity is the single most important feature of an investment. If you can't exit, you don't have control. And if you don't have control, you don't really own anything. For many users, this felt like a trap. Money went in, but it couldn't come out. And while these reports were circulating, something else was happening quietly. According to Logan Paul's own public comments, he later bought the card back. That revelation confused people immediately. If users still held tokens, if the platform was struggling, if people were locked out, how does one person buy back an asset that was supposedly owned by many? Was there a vote? Was there consent? Was there a payout? Those questions remain unanswered for a lot of people. Eventually, Liquid Marketplace shut down. The website stopped operating. The marketplace disappeared. For users still holding tokens, this felt like the door slamming shut. No platform, no secondary market, no clear resolution, just digital assets tied to something they could no longer reach. Public reporting later revealed that regulators in Ontario launched an investigation into the company's top executives. The allegations were serious: misleading representations, improper handling of investor funds, unregistered securities. It's important to be precise here. Logan Paul was not named as a respondent in that regulatory action. But context matters. Logan publicly described himself as a co-founder. He promoted the platform, he supplied its most high-profile asset, and his name was inseparable from its marketing. Meanwhile, the people who bought in were still waiting. This is where history starts to echo, because this isn't the first time Logan Paul has been involved in a situation where fans or investors were promised compensation. In the past, he made public commitments, apologies, statements about making things right, and yet, years later, many people from those earlier situations still say they never received what was promised. That history changes how people interpret silence, because trust doesn't reset, it accumulates. So when the Pokémon card resurfaced in headlines, the reaction wasn't excitement, it was rage. Fast forward to now, the Pikachu Illustrator card is once again being promoted, once again being discussed in terms of massive dollar amounts, once again positioned as a historic collectible. But the timing feels cruel, because the same unresolved questions still hang in the air. What happened to the token holders? What happened to the money? What happened to the ownership that was sold? How does the card keep moving forward, while the people who funded it remain stuck? Collectors began accusing Logan of price manipulation. Others accused him of artificially inflating value through hype. Some simply said this is what happens when influencers enter markets they don't respect. Regardless of where you stand, one thing is undeniable. This card stopped being about collecting. It became about extraction. And this leads to the bigger issue. This story is not just about Logan Paul. It's about what happens when influencer culture collides with finance, when trust replaces regulation, when marketing replaces disclosure, when massive platforms replace accountability. Fractional ownership is sold as empowerment. But without transparency and liquidity, it becomes something else entirely. A system where the buyer takes all the risk and the promoter keeps all the upside. No voting power, no exit strategy, no real control, just hope. And hope is not an investment. Here's the uncomfortable reality. If this had been done by a small, unknown startup, it would have collapsed quietly. But it wasn't. It was done by someone with enormous influence, someone with endless resources, someone who did not need to do this, someone who could have made everyone whole. And yet, here we are, with unanswered questions, with locked-out users, with millions circulating, while others were left behind. If you take one thing away from this story, let it be this. When something is marketed like an investment, it should behave like an investment. You should be able to exit. You should know exactly what you own. And you should never depend on an influencer's goodwill to get your money back. Collectibles are supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be about passion, not financial landmines disguised as opportunity. And if silence is the strategy now, it's only making the story louder. This isn't over. And eventually, someone always pays the price.